development there. And I study Alzheimer's disease in both the general population as well as the Down syndrome population. I can always talk about my research for days, so if you ever have questions, please let me know. But it is truly my honor to be here and speak with you about basics in the brain. So we're going to walk a little bit about the brain itself, kind of get familiar with what parts of the brain do what kind of diseases the brain might get. And we're going to end on a more positive note, more about how we can reduce our risk of something called dementia. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. We'll go over that, and also a little bit about the advancements and the therapies in the field. Sound good? Awesome, yes. So again, today's presentation, we're going to start off with basics in neuroanatomy. We're just going to go through the different parts of the brain. I'm going to tell you the really cool jobs that they have. Then we're going to go into those different diseases that exist in our world, unfortunately, but the more we know, the more power we have over it. So we'll go through those. How we're going to reduce our risk of things like Alzheimer's disease and all those other diseases, but mainly dementia, right? Dementia, we'll define it, we'll talk about it. And then advances in the field. It'll be a quicker presentation for the most part. Feel free to interrupt me with questions, but we'll also have a lot of time for questions after. All right, here we go. Hang on tight. So the basics. So these are the major regions of the brain. So this is if I was looking this way. That's where the brain's sitting, right? So that blue lobe in the front, that's our frontal lobe. Then as we move back, so frontal lobe, we move a little further back. We're going this way, guys. This way is the temporal lobe. Up top is your parietal lobe. In the back of your brain is your occipital lobe. Right underneath that is your cerebellum, and that is our beautiful brain stem to really connect our brain to the rest of our body. I'll go over what each of these do separately. Just wanted to introduce those major regions now. So the first one's the frontal lobe. I call it the CEO. It really has everything to do with your decision making. If you have a pudding in front of you, or if you have fruit in front of you, and you make the decision to eat, I would eat the pudding. Some people might eat the fruit, but we're all going for the pudding. That is your frontal lobe making that decision. It also regulates your personality. So if you're a funny, outgoing extrovert, or if you're reserved introvert, all of that is being processed through your frontal lobe. It also regulates your emotions. So if you're mad that day, if you're grumpy, I know that's me. If you wake me up before 7 a.m., that's all regulated through your frontal lobe. And it's also your impulse control, which I've heard we're slowly losing that with age, but you guys can let me know that one. So what happens if it's damaged? All these things kind of do a 180. So you have difficulty with regulating your emotions. You have difficulty with thinking, planning, making those decisions. And in fact, there's a lot of research on this one specific disease called frontotemporal dementia we'll touch on, where it really damages this part, and people do a 180. So we'll have cases where someone comes in and they're a church goer, they love their family, they're very financially responsible. They get this disease and all of a sudden they ran off to Vegas, they're gambling, they're blowing their money, and those are real life examples and a very, very true and tried case to what disease can do in the brain. So these are some of the diseases associated. We'll go over a couple, but one is that frontotemporal dementia. We also see this in Alzheimer's disease. And then stroke and traumatic brain injury. So if you have damage to your brain, either by brain bleeds or if you knock your head on something in a traumatic way, this can be a result of damage to your frontal lobe. Okay, any questions on the frontal lobe yet?
Yeah, I need to talk slower.
All right, we can go into the temporal lobe. I call this the librarian. Has anybody heard of the hippocampus? Anyone? Yeah. So in Latin, it means seahorse. I know, fun fact, tell your friends. What it does, it's your memory center. So everything you learn gets processed in this part, and that's what creates your memories. Unfortunately, this is the first part, or right next to it is the first part that's damaged by Alzheimer's disease, and that's why memory loss is so prevalent. But this is all about your memory, your hearing, your language, your recognition of faces, so your friends, objects like your car in the parking lot, and it also helps with your frontal lobe to regulate your emotions. So although these different parts have their specific job, they all work together to make you who you are. So just always keep that in mind. And when that gets damaged, so that's where memory loss really sets in. Recognizing people, maybe it just seems unfamiliar, or maybe you think of a word, but you just can't quite get to that word, right? You think about words around it, but not that specific word. Those things are subtle lapses in your temporal lobe. Also changes in emotion and behavior. If you feel yourself getting mad sooner, or a little more irritable in certain ways, or if you're like unbelievably happy and you don't know why. Things like that can happen if you have damage to your temporal lobe. So frontotemporal dementia is one of those diseases. Alzheimer's disease is huge. That's the first lobe that is impacted, and it spreads, and we'll go through all that. And of course, stroke, traumatic brain injury, and then epilepsy, which is associated with seizures. Okay, any quick questions on the temporal lobe? Cool. All right, we'll head into the parietal lobe. So that's this guy up here. This is our GPS system. This is if you're walking, has anybody walked and just like ran into something? You know? And if you said no, you're lying. Because I did that about twice today. So it's how your body exists in space, right? It's knowing that I have to walk here so I don't run into this. It's oh shoot, there's a wire here. That's what the parietal lobe helps with. Also, touch, pressure, pain, feelings of texture, all of those perceptive senses with your body and your hands, all through the parietal lobe. It also helps with hand-eye coordination, so if I threw a ball at you, you would catch it. And it also supports reading, writing, math, and spelling, mainly because it works with your other lobes of the brain. So things like writing, you physically have to do. Dancing, you physically have to do. So it really does play a part in that. Damage here, so all of these things kind of start getting a little janky, right? So you have difficulty judging where objects are. You know, you're bumping into things, maybe you're falling a little more, you're tripping a little more. Sometimes if you touch something and, has anyone burnt their hand before cooking or anything, right? And it kind of feels dull after. That means you can't really feel well because you got burned, but sometimes if there's damage in the brain, you can still have that phenomenon happen because of damage to that network. And then, of course, difficulty reading, writing. You also kind of tend to ignore one side of your body. So maybe you're really good navigating your right side, but not your left side, and you start smacking your hand into things, trying to reach for things. This all can be part of parietal lobe degeneration. Yeah, so diseases associated. Alzheimer's disease is pretty global, so you'll see that pop up pretty frequently. And then stroke and traumatic brain injury can also be there. Also, don't worry about taking notes too fast. I can send these slides to Lorena, and she can either print them out or send it to your email. And I'm always a resource, so if you guys ever want to reach out, I'm more than happy, okay? I don't want to feel like you guys are pressured into taking notes. Now we're going to move into the occipital lobe. The one major job, I wish I was occipital lobe, where I only had to do one thing really well. Don't tell them. It's seeing. So more than 90% of all your vision is from your brain. Yes, you see it through your eyes, but it is all kind of, it's all calculated and shown in an image that you know through your brain. So processes everything you see, it recognizes colors, shapes, patterns, detects motion, but it's really that turning the information you see into an image your brain can understand. Because naturally, the eye, we actually see inverse. We see the world upside down through our eye. Your brain says, nope, let's flip it for you. It's a very cool thing. I don't know why it's so complicated, but yeah. So if I didn't have theoretically, if I didn't have my brain to do that, we would see everything upside down. It's your brain that shows you right side up. So when this is damaged, blurred vision, vision loss. So if anyone's knocked their head, or if you've heard of whiplash, sometimes you have some blurred vision, or your eyes seem a little tender. That's because you're hitting that part of your brain that actually is used to see everything, right? And then trouble recognizing people, words, objects, seeing movement even. And a lot of times in very certain or specific neuropsychiatric conditions, you start to get those hallucinations and your occipital lobe is firing during that time. So things like stroke, traumatic brain injury, and then this really long word, posterior cortical atrophy, that is a disease that attacks the back of the brain. So that's what our occipital lobe does. All right, any questions thus far? Yeah?
Which one is spatial relationships?
That one's the parietal lobe. Yeah. The parietal lobe,
Oh, the
so
parietal.
it's this guy.
Oh.
Yeah, your GPS. But yeah, it does work with your occipital lobe a lot. Because there is a coordination between seeing, knowing where your body is, but also seeing where other things lie. So it's a great point. There's a global network of firing of these cells that are actually helping you do all these cool tasks. That's a great question. Yeah?
Which part controls balance?
Balance? Oh, I'm so happy you said that. Because the next one is our cerebellum. Thank you for that. She gave me a layup, people. All right, so this is the choreographer. This is balance. So if you can just go like your posture, I'm balancing on one leg, I'm kicking a soccer ball. All these things are about fine motor skills, movement, balance. Helps with the timing and coordination and precision. It also is coupled with another part of the brain that I'll be showing. It's like our bonus part of the brain that I'll be showing next. But again, this is the whiplash thing too. Not only your occipital lobe, but also right underneath is your cerebellum. So if you fall and knock your head back, there are times where you can feel a little off balance, where you can feel like you can't really grab something as nice and fine as you normally do, right? You can have shaky or unsteady movements, right? Or hesitation in those movements. And this typically happens when you can get a stroke anywhere in your brain. So it really depends on where you get that stroke. Traumatic brain injuries, like we were discussing. You have a thing called multiple sclerosis, if you ever heard of MS. That also attacks the cerebellum. And a long-winded one again, the spinocerebellar ataxias. It specifically looks at proteins in the cerebellum itself. Just a long name for us to be confused by, right? And then that works with what I call the game controller, the basal ganglia. So really interesting. So when you look here on the top portion, or the top image, you see how the basal ganglia is kind of wedged in the exact center of the brain? So when you develop your brain, does anybody know why our brain has wrinkles?
Yes, what?
Has wrinkles. Have you ever seen, how?
For surface.
For surface. Yeah, that's right. So we're so smart. Our brain is growing, but our cranium's only so big, right? So it has to roll on each other, make these little wrinkles so it can fit in your cranium, right? It's also, those wrinkles, also called the neocortex or the new cortex. So that's the newer part of your brain. The basal ganglia is the oldest part of your brain. So it's the first thing when you're in your mom's womb that starts to begin in the neural tube. But this is a really cool region because it, if I start a movement and I stop a movement, it really is those fine touches and making sure those movements are sharp and I'm doing what I want without other movements getting in the way, right? That everything that I intend to do, I can do, is all processed through the basal ganglia, in turn with working with the rest of your brain. And it also plays a role in your motivation, your reward, and your learning. This is going to come back in Parkinson's disease. So just keep that in mind, and Parkinson's is an interesting one. So again, what happens if this is damaged? So difficulty starting movements, slow or stiff movements, uncontrollable jerky movements like tremors, right? Problems in balance and coordination, and some of the cognitive or what you notice in life symptomology-wise is changes in habits, right? So maybe you're used to doing one thing, or maybe if you go out of the shower, you have a way you dry yourself off. If you wake up, you have a routine in the morning. You can start seeing little differences in these routines, which is a really interesting symptom related to the basal ganglia. And then of course it's associated with Parkinson's disease, also Huntington's disease, and Tourette's syndrome. We'll be going over Parkinson's and Huntington's today. And then we have one more, which is your brain stem. So your brain stem is doing all the jobs that you don't want to actively do, right? So keeping your blood pressure, breathing, you know, it would really suck if you have to conscientiously breathe every single breath. So our brain stem does it for us. It also helps with swallowing, sneezing, coughing, all those things that you're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's what your brain stem does. And it also carries messages from your brain down to your body. Damages here, so if you have some severe damage here, it can be very lethal because it is that part that's connecting your brain and your body. And then we have about 9 minutes, or no, we're at 4:30. Whew. I was like, we're about to rush through, people.
We have time, so you can.
Okay, cool. And changes to your heart rate, your blood pressure can happen, difficulty moving or feeling your body parts, because if you think about it, your brainstem is around here, right? On the lower side of your brain, but it connects the rest of your body. So imagine if something, you know, took you out here, wouldn't be good, right? So things like if you get into a bad accident or like internal decapitation, I know that's so sad to think of, but there are cases where this happens and it can be a very lethal injury. Okay, so those are all about neuroanatomy. Do you have any questions about neuroanatomy? Yeah.
Does prednisone, or not prednisone, but the vitamin for aging, do they help at all, or do they have any benefit to the brain development?
Yeah, so I am not a clinical researcher. I don't know if you have any experience with that specific one?
Yeah, I don't have any experience with that specific one, but usually what we say is talk with your doctor with some of those vitamins or supplements that you encounter, because it's important to have a complete workup to see if that's something beneficial for yourself, just because everyone's a little bit different.
Well, I was just discussing this with my oncologist because I also have prostate cancer, and he was treating me for the prostate cancer. And my PSA has been reduced to less than 1. And he said that I'm also going to experience some problem with memory loss, because apparently the hormones from the PSA are necessary for the brain to maintain memory. And so I was just curious about whether there's anything prophylactically that I can do to delay this kind of thing, or am I going to be faced with reality?
We do. I'll be talking about some lifestyle factors you can take that are pretty good at helping with that. Of course, talk to your primary or talk to your doctor about your concern on that and see what they have to say. But there are proven lifestyle factors that can help with your brain aging process. And it kind of works pretty across the board. That's what studies are showing. But it's pretty much about overall general wellness. Yeah. But that's a great question.
You have an unusual combination of Down syndrome and Alzheimer's.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, in your study of Alzheimer's, what you see in Down syndrome that is similar, like sometimes the developmental stages of learning disabilities are the opposite of dementia,
Yeah.
time-wise. So I just wondered what the similarities are between those two.
Yeah, totally. So, I always love to talk about my research. So actually, nearly all people with Down syndrome will get Alzheimer's disease. There's a genetic connection. So there's a protein that makes Alzheimer's disease. There's 2 actually, but one of them, that's encoded on chromosome 21. So those who aren't familiar with Down syndrome, it's when you have 3 copies of that chromosome. So what happens is, from development all the way, because it's a developmental condition, but then they develop this Alzheimer's, so they have a lifelong overproduction of this protein. So as long as, I say nearly all, but as long as you have all 3 of those chromosomes, they will get Alzheimer's disease. No ifs, ands, or buts. And if anything, Down syndrome actually teaches us a lot about Alzheimer's disease in the general population. Because people with Down syndrome will actually get Alzheimer's disease in a very predictable manner. So by 40s, they will have full-fledged Alzheimer's disease. So by 30, they'll get amyloid beta plaques. By 40, they'll get tau tangles, which we'll go over what those mean. And then it's not until 50 where they get cognitive delays, where they get cognitive symptoms, right? But in the general population, that doesn't work that way. People get it sporadically, right? Because it's not genetically tied. Some are, but 96% of all AD cases do not, right? And what we can learn from the Down syndrome population is actually tracking these pathologies, learning everything we can to know about what that looks like in the brain, and then therefore it can start to advise timing the therapeutics themselves, knowing exactly what kind of biological mechanisms are starting and what's causing it, where in the general population, it's sporadic. So somebody can get it at 85, someone can get it at 65, someone can get it at 72, and it's kind of like this, right? So we learn a lot from each other, and what we learn in the Down syndrome space will apply to the general population, and they actually look very similar. There's not a lot of difference between Alzheimer's and the general population in terms of onset of that pathology or the disease mechanism, but we can control for that aging. So since they're so closely tied together and the disease progresses in a similar way in an individual, we can actually use the information from both to really apply. But that's a great question, and thank you for asking about my research. I love it. Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if it's like a disease now. There are people who have behavioral problems like OCD, alcoholism, drug addictions. Are those connected to the malfunction of the brain in any way? Or
Yeah. So there is a neuro background to a lot of those things. I'm not a neuropsychiatrist by training, but what I do know is there's different hyperactivity in areas, for like OCD or even like schizophrenia. There's research in hyperactivity of the brain. There's circuits of the brain. We actually have a center that looks at these neuropsychiatric diseases specifically from the behavioral standpoint, right? I can't speak too eloquently on each one individually, but there's absolutely a brain-related mechanism behind those things. Alcoholism and habitual behavior as well is also something being researched. So absolutely, yeah.
I wonder if you could tell me the difference between Lewy bodies and Alzheimer's. Is it a different type of plaque or something?
Different type of protein. Yeah, so one is alpha-synuclein protein, and the other one is based on two. So that one is Lewy body, right? For Alzheimer's disease, it's amyloid beta plaques and tau tangles. So both are about the accumulation of those specific proteins that can then, it turns from helps the brain to hurts the brain. So these are all from active processes that are helpful to the brain. But what happens when you start, like if you start making a bunch of copies of something, the odds of an error occurring is pretty high when you keep just making them through a lifetime. So for both of those things, it's just the overproduction of the bad part of that protein that's being produced based on error. It could be like a gene mutation. So us stopping the process won't actually help anything, because then we're stopping the process that part of it is actually keeping the brain healthy.
Oh.
Yeah. Double-edged sword, right? Yeah. Awesome. Oh yeah, sorry.
People are asking you questions. You're answering to them. What was the question and why your voice died out when you're answering?
Oh, okay. So I don't think I
know
can.
what they're asking.
Yeah. Okay. So
I'd like to hear what you're answering.
absolutely. So the mic's not helping too much. I apologize. Okay. So to wrap as much as I can up. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you when you do that,
Okay.
but not when you talk to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I understand.
Because your voice dies out.
Gotcha. Okay. So to kind of, I'm sorry? Oh, to try to answer as fast as I can for what I remember. So let's see. Do you guys remember all the questions? No? Okay. So difference between Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body pathology is essentially Lewy body pathology has an alpha-synuclein protein, while Alzheimer's disease has an amyloid beta and tau pathology. They're all different proteins, but what they have in common is that they all get it in an overproductive way. And we can't cut them completely out because when they're working well, it's good for the brain. But these are the bad proteins that happen when you have errors in the processing of that protein. So that was one. Two is about neuropsychiatric conditions, specifically in behavioral. So if you have somebody who has OCD or alcoholism or maybe a really specific behavioral tic, is that part of the brain as well? Or is that just something about their feelings and their personalities? And my answer was that it is neurospecific. So although it's shown as a behavior, all of that is being processed through the brain. And then another question was about my research, about why we study people with Down syndrome. With Alzheimer's disease, what's the connection? So people with Down syndrome, as long as they have true Down syndrome with all 3 copies of chromosome 21, they will get Alzheimer's disease. On that chromosome, they have amyloid beta, it gets overproduced, and unfortunately that means that they get Alzheimer's disease really early in their life. But what we find out from that research, as well as general population, since it's the same disease, it's actually pretty interchangeable. So we're doing a lot of good research that pushes both, and what Down syndrome gives us is that we can predict what age they get that Alzheimer's disease, since they get it so young and it's in such a predictable manner. And I think those are the 3 main questions that cover everything I just said. Yeah, but
What age has something to do with it?
aging is the #1 risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Yes. Yeah, in the general population and in the Down syndrome population. So the older we get, the more likely we will get Alzheimer's disease.
Because I notice for me, that as I age, my attention span is shorter. My being able to assimilate things is shorter. I can tell from one week to the next.
Gotcha.
But then I'm getting older.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, unfortunately we are all getting older, but you know, I think you're pretty sharp.
106.
Okay, I'll clap that one. 106? Wait, you never discussed a lady's age, though. So, you know, yeah. Yeah.
Is there any correlation between dementia and like sleeping pills, painkillers, things like that?
Okay, so the question is there a relationship between dementia, Alzheimer's or dementia? Dementia and sleeping pills and painkillers. So, from my understanding, nothing's sufficient. You know, it's kind of your general health is the biggest thing, right? So I'll be talking a little bit about risk reduction and why sleeping is important, right? Sleeping is very important. I know you shrugged at me like you're not getting enough sleep. Yes.
With her question
Yeah.
about the sleeping,
Yeah.
I've been taking Benadryl,
Okay.
and it's successful in keeping me sleeping through the night.
Yes.
But I just found out it's detrimental to whatever goes on with on the person's dementia.
Okay. I don't know about any research on Benadryl being, the question was about Benadryl and sleeping. So to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything research-wise that have shown such a tight correlation between those.
Yeah,
Um,
it does increase your risk of dementia.
Do they know why?
Well, I didn't get that.
No,
far,
you're good,
so
yeah,
I don't, they may know. I don't know.
Is there a
Justine.
correlation between sleep and amyloid plaques or ischemic, whatever?
Yeah, I think Patty might be able to answer you actually.
The problem with Benadryl is that it causes what's called cholinergic side effects.
Somebody
so-
over there stop talking. I can't hear her.
I'll repeat. Stop.
Benadryl, the active ingredient in Benadryl causes what's called cholinergic side effects. So it decreases the availability of an important brain chemical that helps with healthy memory. It doesn't cause
Yes.
dementia,
Mhm.
but it can reduce the availability of chemicals that keep you sharper. So it's actually on a restricted list called the
Gotcha.
Beers list for pharmacists and, for over-the-counter and prescription medications. It's one that is noted that nobody over 65 should take.
Gotcha, that's good to know.
Isn't it the same with, sorry, with Ambien as well? No? Oh,
Not-
sorry.
What about Ambien?
Okay.
What
yeah.
was the acronym for that list you said?
Beers?
The
Beers?
Beers list.
Can you spell it?
It's BEERS, it's after
Oh,
Dr.
thank
Beers.
you. Thank you, I didn't hear it.
BEERS, like
Thank
drinking
you.
beer.
Beers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
I was, I heard a psychologist say years ago that the brain is 80% cognition and 20% emotion. But when emotion kicks in, 80% kicks out. Do you have anything to say about that?
I don't agree with it. Yeah, I think your brain is all one, right? So it requires your entire brain to have an emotion, right? So I don't quite. Maybe it's maybe it's in a context that he was trying to get a point across. You know what I'm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're in an emotional state, more than likely.
Gotcha. Yeah. So over a heightened emotional response. So the question is does your cognition just go out if you have an emotional response? The answer is not quite. But the more emotion you show, maybe your logistical thinking starts to shorten a little bit, but that's mainly just how your brain's interacting with this circumstance that's in front of you. That's what makes us human, is that we have morals, we have ethics, we have this ability to think at a very high level. So with a mix of that, sometimes there's an imbalance, but it's not necessarily like your cognition's like, see ya. It's more that they kind of have to play nice, but sometimes one kind of oversees the other. That's why like sometimes if you have a huge emotional response, and you start doing something really erratic, and it's like, well, when I now think about it with a clear mind, maybe that was a rash decision, and that's maybe what he was getting at. I'm going to go ahead and move on, just so we have a little more time.
Yes,
Okay, so we're going to talk about neurodegenerative diseases. Thank you all for the questions, though. All right, so we're going to discuss what dementia is. So dementia is an umbrella term. So dementia itself is a term about loss of memory and other thinking abilities that interfere with daily living. That is what dementia is. Under that umbrella are various ways you can develop dementia. So these are kind of where you see those neurodegenerative diseases. So Alzheimer's, number one culprit of the onset of dementia in the United States and globally. Vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, so all those fall underneath that umbrella, but dementia itself is just if you have loss of memory or suffer the inability or thinking abilities that interfere with your daily life. Cool. So we're gonna hop into Alzheimer's disease. So like we had discussed, most common cause of dementia, around 7 million Americans currently have Alzheimer's disease, and around 55 million globally. In the United States, by 2060, that number is supposed to skyrocket to around 14 million.
Why?
Because of aging? Yeah, because people are living longer. The number one risk is aging. So again, as people are extending their life because of, we figured out how to keep the heart healthy, how to keep the bodies healthy, we're now living longer. But now your brain's making more of those amyloid beta plaques and those tau tangles, which are depicted over here, those bushy brown looking things. That's a stain. So we take a slice of brain and we'll stain them with the antibody to see these guys. Those are amyloid beta plaques. What they do is they stick to things around it and they start killing those neurons or those brain cells. And then you have, within the cell, can develop tau tangles. Tau tangles are a protein that it's what happens when kind of that skeleton of your brain cell starts to dissociate from itself. It starts to break apart. They aggregate, and then when they're released out into the open, after killing that cell, they'll kill more cells. And that is what Alzheimer's disease is. There is no cure. So symptoms are memory loss, difficulty finding words, following conversations, and then trouble planning, solving problems. getting lost in familiar places. So one of the big things that we test is if you get lost in the parking lot where you parked your car, is one of the big telltale signs. Changes in mood and personality. And it affects your brain pretty globally. It starts in your temporal lobe, but then it kind of works its way back from the frontal lobe all the way down to your occipital lobe. And that's why you see a lot of various symptoms associated with Alzheimer's disease. ALS, so if anyone's heard about ALS or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, it is a disease that targets your motor neurons, right? So it's progressive. It's about there's genetic factors as well as environmental factors. 10 to 15% of those cases are inherited or genetically tied, but the rest of them, it happens sporadically. And it can be gene mutations, so maybe you have your set of genes, but eventually they start making little changes, and then it can result in this. Or it can be an environmental thing. So as motor neurons die, muscles become weaker, so your brain cells can't communicate to those muscles, and you start to suffer muscle deterioration. There's currently no cure for this as well. So symptoms include muscle weakness, difficulty walking, frequent tripping, trouble using their hands, difficulty swallowing is kind of an end stage one, and breathing becomes more difficult, which is also an end stage symptom. This really attacks the brainstem, the connection between your brain and your body, as well as your frontal lobe. And it really, the symptoms do include emotional regulation issues that you also see towards the beginning of the disease. All right, Parkinson's. This is where the basal ganglia kicks in, the game controller, the oldest part of your brain. So Parkinson's disease is when dopaminergic, so they're neurons that create dopamine, in a thing called your substantia nigra. It's at the base of your basal ganglia. Substantia nigra means black substance. So if you look on the right-hand side, on the normal one, you see that black pigmentation in your substantia nigra. On the left is what happens when you have Parkinson's disease. So you see it's fainter, not too much black. It's because those neurons are dying off. We don't know why. We have ideas why those neurons die. But at the moment, this is something that researchers have been looking at for years, trying to figure out why they die so particularly in this area. A fun little story is when they needed a lead about this, in Northern California back in the 80s, I believe, there was a case of bad drugs on a school campus, right? Started to go around, and they're like, what is this, right? And they found out that somebody who was selling a bad strain of this, it was causing these Parkinson-like symptoms in people coming in to the hospital. And they found that whoever made this synthetic drug, it ended up mimicking another, or a form of the drug that attacks the dopaminergic neurons in the brain, specifically in the substantia nigra. So they were inducing Parkinson's by accident. They were just growing bad drugs. And that's how they got the lead on what Parkinson's was that the symptomology looked very similar to those with somebody who comes in with Parkinson's. Again, no cure. Symptoms, unfortunately, are tremors, shaking, especially when resting, slow movement, muscle stiffness and rigidity, small shuffling steps, and loss of smell as an early symptom. Sleep problems and mood changes, but this is a devastating disease. Once you get it, it doesn't take too long unfortunately, for that end stage to appear. Again, attacks the basal ganglia and the brainstem. Frontotemporal dementia, so this is an MRI. So this is a person's brain. On the left, that's a normal brain. On the right, you see all that black spacing where there should not be. That is tissue loss. Your brain is dying. All those neurons that make up your tissue are dying. So this is a progressive disease, impacts individuals between 45 and 65 years old, and it's a buildup of another type of protein called TDP43. And 30 to 50% of these cases are inherited, and there's still no cure. This is the one where you do that 180 in your personality. So family man turns into a gambler, that story. This is the disease that really shows the phenomenon of that situation. So again, personality and behavioral disorder, losses of social awareness, so that impulse control, maybe someone like just says the craziest thing or says the most inappropriate thing, that can be a symptom. Reduced empathy, emotion expression, so someone who just like does not share or doesn't empathize with anyone, doesn't see the good in anything. Trouble understanding or using language is also associated, and repetitive or compulsive behaviors. And it attacks the frontal and temporal lobe, so when you get this, those are the only two lobes that are really impacted. The rest of your brain could look fine. Also, yeah, so before I became a PhD student, I was a brain donation coordinator, so I was the one who helped with the brain donation program. We've seen some of these brains come in, and quite literally, if I saw the back half of the brain, it would look completely normal and healthy. The front of the brain was a whole different story. Huntington's disease. So this is the rare inherited disease. So it gradually damages these nerve cells, and it's caused by mutation in what's called the Huntington gene. Mutations of this gene build up inside the neurons, cause cell death, and it's a devastating disease. So once you get it and you start showing those symptoms, it's not a long time before end stage, unfortunately. And it's a dominant gene, autosomal dominant, which means you only need one copy from a parent. You don't need two. As long as you get one, you will develop Huntington's disease. Symptoms begin between 30 and 50. I have seen it a little earlier. There's no cure, and again, it is devastating. So unfortunately, your life is cut pretty short with this disease. The symptoms include involuntary jerky movements, difficulty walking, maintaining balance, difficulty planning, learning, making decisions. It's kind of a global death of these neurons. So a lot of symptoms can result. It's not just one set of them because it's happening to the whole brain. Yeah. And it affects your frontal and temporal lobe majorly, but again, or your frontal and basal ganglia, but again, it's pretty global. So on the left is a healthy brain, where it's full and plump. On the right, you see all those gaps that are starting to form and how much it shrinks. That's what we call atrophy. That's the death of those neurons. Yeah.
What's the average age that these people live to?
If you start showing symptoms, maybe 10, 15 years, I would say, after you show symptoms, at most. But yeah, it is very depressing. But you know what's next? We're going to end on a positive note. I knew that was coming. Yeah.
If somebody doesn't develop, say, Huntington's by the time they're 50,
Yeah.
do they know they're not going to develop it at all?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. So the question is if somebody who doesn't develop Huntington's by 50, if they know. So yeah, so if you have that gene, and typically the parents would know, because the parents would need to have that child pretty young, because they would then know they had Huntington's disease as well, right? So once you get it, you will experience those symptoms very early, relatively in life. I think I saw someone like 25, another one around 32, that they started showing symptoms. But if you're past 50, your body has gone through enough processing where the odds of you having it are slim to none. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah?
My brother had a stroke and had aphasia pretty badly from the stroke. His speech was garbled. But when he sang a song, the lyrics were clear. And I couldn't understand the lyrics. The speech was there in singing, but in speaking, it wasn't. It was all garbled.
What's going on, right? Yeah. Okay, so the question was, it was about a story. 1 second. It was about a story, how her brother had a stroke, and he was having trouble with his language, but once he got to singing a song, everything kind of clicked, and it all came together. So there's a lot of phenomena in there that's still being researched, I will say. But what I can say is that the brain has an ability of storing memories, especially associated to music, to things you've done your whole life. If you played sports your whole life, those little fine-tuned movements. Music is a very strong therapeutic as well. Art is as well too, so maybe You know, if you put an artist in the same situation, they can probably draw beautifully but have issues with writing. So what I can say is the brain sometimes holds on to these networks. The reason you have thoughts, the reason you can do stuff is because there's billions of cells in your brain that when you start practicing something or you start noticing something, it'll actually build those networks. They'll all fire together, they'll call each other, they'll connect. So when you have to recollect that thing, they'll all fire at the same time because of familiarity. So that is part of why the brain can do that. Past that, I do know there's research about different phenomena like this. I can't speak on that research very eloquently, so I won't. But there are reasons why our brains can, and it's a beautiful thing, right? You had another question?
Yes, are you going to talk about research? Have they done, there are no cures, but they're working in that direction, or in what direction are they working?
Yeah, so we'll touch on it a little bit. At the end, maybe we can get into specific questions. The question was if we're going to go over advances in the field. So I'll give some time for that. See what I say, and if you have questions, let me know, okay? Yeah.
What about all the children that are getting diagnosed on the spectrum and everything?
Yeah, just in general about autism. Okay, so yeah, autism. Some questions about children with autism, and there are, the brain is a peculiar place. A lot of things can happen and conditions can happen. I'm not versed in autism research. There is one called Fragile X that people are looking at. So it's from the X chromosome, and essentially they're looking to see the correlation between that and the diagnosis of having autism. But again, everyone's brain is a little different, right? And there are some developmental delays that some individuals have. I'm not a developmental neuroscientist, so again, I can't speak a ton on that. But I do know there's a lot of research being done, and what I can do is actually send, I have a friend who works in autism research. I can put some slides together, and I can send that over to you for information.
Because it's an epidemic.
Yeah. All right. I know you had a question. I'll get to you right after.
And is long haul COVID affecting dementia and memory?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of research, and it's about COVID in the brain. COVID in the brain. So unfortunately, we do see some ties to COVID in the brain. It depends on age. From what I know, my friend who just did his dissertation, it impacts the overall inflammatory profile of your brain. Again, depending how old you are, how well you take care of yourself will also help determine that. But it's one of those things where your brain goes through some trauma. And and your cerebrovascular, so your blood vessels are one of those things that also are in that inflammatory profile. So how your blood's flowing in your brain, how well your immune system, because your brain has its own immune system. It's not part of the rest of your body. So when you get COVID and it does pass what we call the blood-brain barrier, it's the network of blood vessels in your brain. The reason why it's different is because we don't want everything to be able to get to our brain, right? Not in the same way. So that's why when we think about clinical trials and drugs, we need to be smart about what we're putting in our brain, but two, if it can even fit into our brain. If it's too big of a molecule, it won't pass that barrier because it's there to protect ourselves, but COVID can.
And I haven't been able to smell or taste for 6 years.
I heard this is a common symptom. I don't know enough about that symptomology, but I do know you're not alone. I do know there's many people who do go through that. And I think it's still so early in the research. We don't know what the long-term effects are, right? Because this only happened 6 years ago. We can't tell you what's going to happen in 10 years. And that's what we're fighting right now. We're trying to figure out through research, give our best forecasting, but it's not perfect right now. All right, I'll take one more and we'll talk about risk reduction.
What are the prospects for a cure for Alzheimer's?
I will actually have a slide about that. But the current one's on trial, right? On the clinical trials, it's about Alzheimer's disease clinical research. That's what we're talking about. We have donanemab, right? But I think donanemab just got taken off. No, it's still on, and lecanemab. What's the one that got taken off? Aducanumab, thank you. So they essentially do the same thing. They're anti-amyloid treatments. So for Alzheimer's disease, the phase 3, so the ones that have made it past all the other phases to get to this point, they clear the amyloid beta from your brain. What we're seeing is, although it can be helpful, and it does clear the amyloid beta, and they do have tolerable effects, there are some adverse effects associated with like your blood vessels. Not for everyone, but it does occur. 2, it does get rid of the amyloid, and 3, it doesn't rescue your cognition. Whatever you already lost in your brain, right, the damage that's done has been done. What it does is it stops it, but that's why our research is trying to find timing where we can have better outcomes on targeting. This is the time frame to remove that amyloid, so we're not losing, neurons, so we're not having cognitive decline. So all to say, it does a really good job, and it does prevent it from moving forward, but we're still in the clinical trial phase. But that's where we're at, and there's a lot of other therapies that are going on, and I'll show you a quick PowerPoint about that as well. Do you have anything to add on that? No, we're good? Ooh, I'm gonna trip on that thing. Okay, now we're gonna end on that positive note. So what we can do to prevent dementia. So this is, you don't have to try to figure out what that is, I just have to reference it so I don't get in trouble. So a lot of things you can do now can actually help reduce your risk of getting dementia. So some modifiable risk factors include in early life, if you have less education, which we don't really have to worry too much about right now. Midlife hearing loss, high cholesterol, depression, hurting your head, so traumatic brain injuries, physical inability, so making sure you're working out, diabetes, smoking, hypertension, obesity, and excessive alcohol. That's in midlife, but it can also be in late life. And in late life, it's a lot about social isolation, air pollution, and visual loss. These are all things that can increase your risk of getting dementia. But 45% of all of this is modifiable, right? Or these represent the 45% that is modifiable, right? So when we're thinking about how to keep ourselves healthy, so I included both of these. So healthy diet, the Mediterranean diet. Anyone in the Alzheimer's disease world, Patty, I know you know this, Mediterranean diet, or the DASH diet. So whole foods, whole grains, healthy fats, fish, berries, everything that gives you antioxidants and vitamins, leafy greens, all the boring stuff, right? I know, brown rice. How dare they take away our pudding? Regular exercise. Are we getting enough exercise, people? Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Keep exercising. If you can, keep walking. Do your stretches. I even need to do that now. I'm preaching out here and I need to. I'll come join you guys. Social engagement, this is massive. Make sure that you're talking to people. You're getting out there. I know sometimes you just don't want to. But have hobbies. Go out and join a club. Being social is one of the most important things you can do, especially as we get older. Quality sleep. Everyone getting enough sleep? Only with Benadryl, I hear. Yeah, only with Benadryl. So 7 to 9 hours. I know, 7 to 9 hours. So the reasoning, I'll give you the good reason. So has anybody heard of cerebrospinal fluid? Cerebrospinal fluid. So a lumbar puncture. If you go to the doctor and they give you a lumbar puncture, have you ever heard of that? No? Okay, cool. So in your brain, you have a drainage system. You have this beautiful liquid called CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. I'm going to say CSF. It actually cleans out your brain. It's pretty cool. So it stays in your spinal column. And when you go to sleep, 7 to 9 hours, it goes up and it cleans out your brain like a dishwasher, right? But you have to hit a certain level of sleep. Otherwise, your body's not going to let you do it. It's too dangerous. It won't bring it up your spinal and it won't wash it out. So that is why we preach 7 to 9 hours. I know, it's a lot sometimes, yeah.
And REM sleep and deep sleep, is a correlation there?
There is a correlation. I'm not a sleep specialist, but it is a note of the REM sleep. So you hit REM sleep and then you go to the next stage, it needs to hit that. So once you go there, then your body's not going to just wake up. It'll have to go through the passages. It goes pretty quick, but it's enough time when you go past REM sleep that your CSF will go and wash you out. It's just to keep you, because if you start to mess up the flow of that CSF, it can be really dangerous for your brain. It can cause inflammation. It can cause it to get stuck somewhere. It can cause hydrocephalus in crazy cases.
How about melatonin?
Melatonin's great. Patty?
Okay.
Is-
Sleepy.
Yeah, that's what we're going for. Yeah, thank you, Patty.
How long I have to take it? Because they recommend only 5 days. Can
I would
take it?
ask your primary. I would ask your doctor. I can't speak on that, and I also don't. I'm not in a place where I can give you a recommendation for that. But I would always, if it's anything therapy, drug related, ask your doctor. Okay. All right. Great questions. All right. Stress management. Okay. Keep that stress down, people. I love whoever laughed. Cortisol levels. Keep it down. Stress does really bad things to your body as a whole, especially your brain. Just try to keep it nice and easy as best you can. Mindfulness exercises, if that doesn't work for you, go have some fun. I don't know what you guys do for fun, but have your hobbies. Have your hobbies socially engage, and that'll really help with both things, right? Mental stimulation, crossword puzzles, watch some Jeopardy, man. I suck at both of those things. I know, I got humbled really quick. But yeah, so just doing other things, you know, if you're like, oh, I want to learn how to do pottery, you know, that's keeping your mind going. You have to keep your mind going. Don't stick to the status quo every day. Do something that excites you, you know, look forward to something. Oh, and then do not smoke. Do not smoke. Good for your heart, good for your brain. Just don't do it. Protect your head. So if you guys I know you guys look like you're riding motorcycles every night. I know, you guys are doing extreme sports. Put a helmet on, right? Stay sharp, again, that's, oh yeah, I know, she knows, she was motorcycle riding.
She's been trying to get you attention.
Oh, I'm sorry, right here? Or who was trying to get my attention?
This lady here.
Oh yeah, do you have a question?
Raising her hand.
I'm sorry, I didn't see, I'm so sorry.
I just wanted to know if there's a pill we can take.
Yeah. There's a pill you can take.
I wish, I would be out of a job.
So seriously.
Yeah,
Is there something that we can do to cure that problem? If we're having.
Yes. What, is the problem dementia? Is the okay.
That's, I don't know if that's, but that's the issue.
Yeah. So there's no one pill you can take. I'll kind of sum that up, okay? So we do have therapies on the market to help with where the biology's lying. So to attack what's happening in the brain. But what we're talking about here is things you can do yourself that actually studies have shown have made a really good impact. Unfortunately, there's not one pill that solves it all. Otherwise, I would be out of a job, to be honest with you. So what you can do are the things listed here, right? So not smoking, keeping a healthy diet, walking, exercising, socially engaging with people. But no, unfortunately, unless it's general wellness, where you go and talk to your provider, and they tell you maybe you're iron deficient, maybe you can use more hydration, also drink water. Things like that can help you, but there's no one pill, unfortunately, that can cure it.
I didn't mean that.
Oh yeah. But so lifestyle factors is what I would recommend, but your doctor might have some recommendations in terms of supplements or pills you may want to take, which is above my pay grade. But yeah, so these are lifestyle things that the literature has shown and studies have shown really help. Yeah, did you have anything on that one?
Well, coming to an academic lecture like this, you all just made about 1,000 new brain connections. So doing things like this and listening to people like Justine is like one of the most important things you can do to be lifelong learners.
We're still talking a little bit, but yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you had go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I was diagnosed with dyslexia
Okay.
in my late 20s.
Yeah.
I was regarded as being a mental retard up to that point.
I'm sorry.
And afterwards, I fell in love with running.
Good.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
I smoked cigars all my life.
Yeah.
6 to 10 Corona cigars.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a cigar since June 2nd a year ago.
Okay, you're awesome.
I still wake up in the morning, I want a cigar.
I know, yeah, I don't think that's changing anytime soon.
Is that gonna change?
I hope. I pray that it does. We're talking about cigar habits and how we're not gonna do that. It's gonna take longer than that, is what I know, but I don't know when. But again, the longer you go, just remember, it's for your brain. It's for your health.
No, it's for my wife.
It's for your wife's health. Yeah, and that is the right response. Yeah, that's the right response.
You don't socialize if you don't smell like a cigar.
Yeah, see? Yeah, it all is all interconnected, right? Okay, and then also taking care of your hearing and vision really help, as well as managing underlying conditions. So if you're diabetic, if you are, you have some form of obesity, if you have a bad heart, things like that. High blood pressure is a huge one. High cholesterol levels is a huge one. I know, I saw the rolling of the eyes, me too. Just managing these underlying conditions will help your overall health. The big picture is keeping yourself healthy will help you in the long run no matter what, right? And to kind of go over the Alzheimer's disease therapies that are on the market. So as of January 1st, there is 192 clinical trials and 158 different drugs that focus on different things, right? So you don't have to what is she showing me? I'll just kind of walk you through. So all the ones, so the rings, the outside rings are the phase 1. Those are kind of that's like the baby phase. So when you're entering into the clinical trials, you're starting to get the preliminary data that's not impacting anyone. It's all research-based, right? But they will eventually go to the second ring, which is phase 2, if they pass all of those, right? If you have all those boards, all those committee members trying to keep you safe, right? If they pass them, they go into the next phase. And then phase 3 is when, that's the current clinical trials we see now. So those are what the rings are. The ones that here in green are disease targeting biologics. What that means is it's actually looking at the mechanism itself. So biology in the brain is focused on that. Similarly, we have the purple one that is looking at small molecules. So 1, how does it get into your brain? And 2, how does it operate when it gets into your brain? So we're targeting those 2 facets. The blue is about symptomology, those neuropsychiatric symptoms that we were talking about. How to keep your cognition, your memory, all the good stuff intact. And then we have a cognition enhancer. So this is kind of getting into what Patty was mentioning about the cholinesterase availability. So you actually have some that are lined in here that focus on cholinesterase production. Again, talk to your provider, see if that is something that would be good for you. I'm not recommending any of these things, but I just wanted to show you the advancements in our therapies. It's the most to date of how many therapies, clinical trials are active, and it's a really good thing. It's all based on research, right? The more we extend, the more the research goes. If you think about it, we were so worried about heart disease, right? That was the #1 killer. Our medical advancements were so great and really fixed that problem as much as they could and in a very quality way. But now we're living longer, and that's when our brain starts to show this damage, right? And that's why neuroscience as a whole is kind of on the back foot in terms of everything else you can heal. You can't take a biopsy of your brain. We tried. No, I'm kidding. But you can't take a biopsy. It's really hard to even get in there to see what's going on. Alzheimer's disease, you can't even diagnose until after someone passed and they donated their brain. We still can't. We can tell you, we have a good idea. We have different ways we can say whether or not cognitively, whether it's taking blood tests. We have a really good idea. But we don't know the severity, and we don't know 100% if it's only Alzheimer's disease, right? Or if it's only one thing. We don't know until we look at the brain. So it makes our jobs really hard because we want to make sure we're saving these people, everyone's cognition and memory earlier in life. But sometimes it's just the hardship of what a neuroscience or neurodegenerative diseases present. Yeah.
MRIs can damage the brainstem?
Yeah, so MRIs are great. We have PET scans that can look at amyloid, and now there's more with taus, with the tau tangles. However, they don't get everything. We have research in my own lab specifically as well that show that we can't get all of that amyloid. We don't know if it's fully that. We see that it's there. We see that it's present. But we don't know, we're missing a whole lot of that amyloid, so we can't stage you appropriately. But what it can tell us is if it's present and gives us a pretty good idea in life, the progression of it. So that's why we use these tools while someone's still living to gauge our therapies, to gauge our clinical trials, to make sure that we are fitting the criteria, so we are managing the dosage as well as the availability of, or if we can even give that drug to you, and if it's safe. Yeah, but that's a great question.
For concussion, does that can affect any part of your brain?
Concussions? Absolutely. Yeah, because it's kind of like a vibration. So concussions, how it affects the brain. So if I did one of these and I hit my head, it'll send a shock wave through my brain. So it can really, it's where the focal point is, but also the rest of your brain can be impacted. Cool, all right. And then I'm going to quickly go through, yeah, go ahead.
Is neuropathy related to brain damage?
Concussions? Depends how...
No, neuropathy, if your fingers
Oh,
or your
neuropathy.
toes.
Yeah, so I do know there is a correlation between the two. I don't know how telling it is of the severity of any brain damage, though. I just know that it impacts that network. I can't speak too eloquently on the rest of that. Yeah, so neuropathy in the brain. Okay, and then there's another positive note. So these are more in the Alzheimer's disease field that we research, but there's cases of resistance and resilience. Resistance is when your brain, despite aging, despite all these environmental or genetic factors, you actually resist any amyloid being produced or tau being produced, as an example, right? So your brain is actually resistant against developing these pathologies. Researchers are currently studying what factors may help make that brain more resistant to change. So again, for example, we've had cases where when you become 85, 90 years old, and we look at your brain, you will have some form of amyloid beta. You will have some form of tau. It's pretty common. We have cases where they've gone past 90, and we don't see these pathologies nearly as much as we would anticipate. This is what we call resistance. When your brain is resisting the onset of that pathology in the brain. We don't know exactly why, but every individual has their strengths in their brain, and we're studying to see what those strengths are. So at UCI MIND, we actually have one called the 90+ study, and it's everyone who donates was over 90 years old. We just want to see, how amazing those brains are and how we can really play into how we can become more resistant ourselves. Resilience, very similar, but it's when you do have this pathology, but you don't show cognitive symptoms, right? So the brain may be able to cope with, adapt to, or compensate for disease-related changes. So even though you have end-stage amyloid, end-stage tau, maybe your cognition just doesn't suffer. And we do have cases of individuals who present as so. And we're trying to figure out how they are so resilient. And we have seen commonalities and influences by experiences across the lifespan. So education, occupations, physical activity, social engagement, cognitive ability, which looks a lot like our risk reduction, right? So people who really have kept a healthy mind-body, and they've shown resilience. So again, for example, we have seen these individuals come in with Alzheimer's disease. We tracked them longitudinally, so they come in and they've helped us with their research. And then they gave us the most generous gift at the end of their life and gave us their brain. And we're able to see just how amazing they are all the way through their life because they've shown how they've been resilient towards developing this disease and their cognition has stayed pretty intact. So just some takeaways. These diseases affect different parts of the brain, can cause changes in memory, thinking, behavior, and movement. Our brains change as we age, but it's not normal or an inevitable part of aging to get dementia, is what I try to say. There are things we can do throughout our life to reduce our risk of this, right? So that chart, I will send out that chart. Try your best. If you follow that as closely as you can modify this risk by 45%, which is pretty good. You know, it's better than some card games in Vegas. And yes, I am old enough to go to Vegas. I know that was a question, right? Right? And everyone's brain is different. Some people show resistance, some show resilience. So why not you, right? I think we're seeing some pretty amazing minds in the crowd today. I hope to be as with it as you guys are, even next year. I forgot where I parked the other day. But thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm always here if you guys have questions. I'll give my email. I'm an open source. If I don't have the answer, I'll find it for you guys, okay? You have a friend in me. All right. Thank you guys. Sorry, we are way over time.
It's okay.
Okay.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, any last minute questions or not?
Anyone
Does anybody have any last minute questions? I'll stick around for a couple minutes if you guys want to come up too.
Yeah, do you have cards up there?
Hi, I'm just nice to meet you. Like, it's not a done, let me know that, you can't refer to the time however, if you were to now,
Oh no, leave it, yeah. I don't think it's mine. Or it's not, Lorena.
This is for Steve. I'll put it there, okay?
Power is and your body is resilient. It knows that it can be bad. So it's resilient.
I don't have go for it. Okay, thank you.
Randy, we're gonna get that set. It's going to really
I'll go grab your
So
water.
he's gonna get a
it's not
go
about
box.
Yeah, I'm gonna get Vivian. You wanna get Vivian's water? I'll go.
It's just like, hey, let me take a second, right? Let me kind of get you here, and then I'm gonna proceed. Your body naturally wants to pass blood, so don't feel that way.
It's important to answer research.
Yeah, I'd rather know.